I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Innu, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Robert Hutchings. I will be chairing the hearing today. I'm joined on the panel with Carrie Linkletter and Richard Whitbread. Representing the Assessment Department of the City of Winnipeg is Brittany Santucci, and our administrative support is Belen Rojo today. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we would limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessment of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. Excuse me. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions based on the evidence presented here today. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 1 through 3 on our docket today. Ms. Rojo, please affirm the assessor and applicant's testimony.
Madam Assessor, please state your full name.
Brittany Santucci.
And you affirm the evidence you represent at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Rod Slaughter.
And you affirm the evidence you represent at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Belen. Good afternoon, Ms. Santucci, Mr. Slaughter. First item on the docket today is item number 1, file number 23-383. Address is 471 Warsaw Avenue. It's a 2024 realty assessment appeal. Ms. Santucci, bear with us 1 second while we pull up your brief, please. Ms. Santucci, when you're ready, please, 471 Warsaw Avenue.
Thank you. This is file number 23-383. As we've said, address is 471 Warsaw Avenue, and the assessed value today is $1,131,000. So this is an office building. On my page 1, I just have a brief information on the building, built in 1976. We have a basement area as well on this building, so the leasable accounts for the main floor and the basement. On my page 2, you can see the last sale on the property was in 2018, so about 3 years prior to the reference date, for $785,000. And from what I can tell, that was a good sale. So our assessment is coming in a bit higher, even though it's about 3 years difference from the reference. For the property, they do have one tenant. They occupy the main and the basement. So that rent is coming in at $11.57 per square foot. As you can see on my page 2, it's just off of Pembina, so it's not right on Pembina. Okay. On my page 3, I just have some exterior photos of the building. And then on my page 4, it starts from the last time someone was inside this building, which was October 2022, just to show some of the space. And then just some interior photos from an ad. On the next page, and we get to the workup on, let's see here, I think my page numbers are wrong. It reverts back to 1. So for my subject property market income, the blended rate is coming in at $15.34 per square foot. So it is coming in higher than what currently the tenant is paying. And I think that has to do with our model and just the fact that this is a property that is slightly off of, like, it is off of Pembina and not on the main strip. We have the standard vacancy for this OFS property at 6%, expenses at 3%, shortfall at $8, and then the cap rate's coming in on the lower end at 6.15. So I have my comps just below that. These average at about $15. Median is 14. A majority of these would be on major routes, more or less, a bit different than the subject. If we go down, I have my cap rate chart, which is on page, again, I'm so sorry, my page numbers are not correct on here. Municipal Assessment Act, I've supplied the income and expense questionnaire as well, just to show what the tenant's paying. I had obviously created the brief. I didn't come here with a rec today, but I just wanted to state, from my comps and the location, I think the rents from the model are coming in a bit high for sure. From what I can tell, the subject property lease, there's no issue with that. It's arm's length. And based on what I had submitted, my recommendation was to maintain the 2024 assessed value of the $1,131,000. But I did just want to point out that I do think that the rents may be a bit on the high side for sure. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany. Mr. Slaughter, any questions of the assessor's evidence presented?
Yes, just a few. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Santucci, thank you for your commentary. I think I would agree with your comments that the model might be exceeding the value based on its location and factors, but I just wanted to establish a few things if you don't mind. The pictures were taken by another colleague. I guess you didn't have a chance to inspect the property yet.
I did not inspect it, no.
Okay, fair enough. But you'd agree from the photographs and the description that basically what we have is a industrial flex type building converted to office, and half of the area is on the lower level. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that lower level, from what we can tell, doesn't have any fenestration or windows at all. Is that correct?
No, so as you can see, it has like obviously flooring, walls, and ceiling, but I could not see any windows from the photos taken by my colleague.
Okay. The comparisons you did show, and I'm not going to go into detail about those because I think we both agree that based on locations, etc., that it would be superior.
I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah, but none of those are lower level, if I'm correct, or maybe one of them is. Is that correct?
I don't think I include the basement comps. If I'm going to speak to basement comps, typically they range from about $7 to $10, depending on if they're bi-level, usually at the higher end where they have the windows and whatnot. But they're not in my brief, but speaking to the ones that I have looked at this cycle, I would say the basement comps range from anywhere from $7 to $10, depending on how nice they are.
Yeah, and I completely agree with Santucci. I think what you'll find is that range or the higher end is typically with fenestration, but
yeah.
Okay, and then the capitalization rate on your page, I guess it's March page 3, but just for the board's reference, this is kind of the summary of the broker reports on what's happening in the market. And if we look at suburban B, I guess that would probably be the best classification of the and the range is shown depending on the broker, and I guess depending on how they calculate it, but it goes from the lowest is 6 and 7.75 is the highest. The average seems to sit around 7%.
Yeah.
Would you agree that 6.15% might be aggressive?
I would say it's definitely on the low end for this type of property.
Okay. So. Thank you very much. I think that's all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slaughter. Carrie, any questions of the assessor?
Yes, I just have a couple. Thank you. Ms. Santucci, this is model driven, your brief?
Yes.
Okay. And I believe you stated that is the tenant in the basement? Is that what you said?
Yeah, they occupy the main and then the basement. So their blended rent that they would pay is $11.57 per square foot.
Okay.
The entire building.
Okay. And the basement has no windows to the best of your knowledge?
From my
looking at
knowledge.
Pictures?
From the photos, yes.
All right. Okay. And would you agree that this perhaps is not the best location, being 1 block off Pembina, and it looks as though it's got other buildings or parking lots or something in front of it just from the photos?
Yeah, I would say compared to being right on Pembina, right on Corden, or right on Academy, it wouldn't be the same.
Right. All right. I thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you, Carrie. Richard, any questions of the assessor?
Did I hear you say this was an arm's length or a lease?
I meant that the lease was an arm's length. There's no related parties. It's a good lease. And then I had also mentioned that the sale was, from what I could tell, an arm's length sale, the one from 2018.
Okay, that's what I heard. Okay, thank you. No further question.
Thank you, Richard. Brittany, I'm looking at your photos on page 1.
Yeah.
Or 3. Oh, here we go.
I'm so sorry.
I'm wondering, are there photos on the main floor?
Yeah, so the photos from the space list listing, where they show the yellow chairs, those would be from the main floor. So there's some windows in the one. And then the ones that were taken by my colleague are the first ones, and those are just of the basement.
Okay. So the main floor, it looks like it's, is it a training area, or do you know what it's used for?
I'm not sure what they specifically use it for. The tenant is a non-profit. It is New Directions.
Oh, okay. Okay. And then there was a permit taken out to develop the lower level to expand the space for the current tenant on the main floor. Is that right?
I didn't have any permit information, but I just know that someone must have went there at some point, even if it was just maybe for the tenant being in the space, and took some photos if we didn't have them on file, but
yeah. Okay. The photo with at the rear of the property with the loading dock, obviously irrelevant to this tenant, I guess.
irrelevant. I would assume irrelevant to them. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. That is all my questions. Thank you very much. Mr. Slaughter, bear with us a second so we can pull up your brief, please. Mr. Slaughter, when you're ready, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just have one question based on the questioning that just happened. You mentioned a permit. I'm just trying to find where that was mentioned.
No, I think it was just maybe in regards to the inspection, but I don't think the inspection was based on a permit with value. I think it was just based on the tenant.
Right. There's no reason that we believe anything changed with the property since the purchase, right? No. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I guess I'll ask you to start on page 6, please. And Ms. Santucci has given a great description of the property, so I need not go into much further detail. I think to Ms. Linklater's comment, you are likely aware of this area. It is more of an industrial area that's off to the east of Pembina Highway. It's more characterized by, there's some auto body shops in the area, some industrial properties. There's a nice brew house next door to the subject. Can't remember the name of it offhand, but it is quite nice. But it's definitely off the high traffic areas. That's the number one point about the subject. Number 2 is that it does have limited parking. There's parking along the side of the building. There's room for about what I count as 8 stalls there. The building was constructed in 1976, and as Ms. Santucci had mentioned, it's basically consists of a main floor and a lower level. The main floor is essentially, Mr. Chairman, to your question, it's 2 private offices, a large kitchen, and an open workstation area. And then the lower level, which does not have any windows, is a large boardroom, one private office, and a small workstation area. And there's just a staircase to access that. We'll please turn to page 10. I'll just give a bit of background on the sale. I had interviewed our client about their ownership of property. And they had purchased the property in March of 2018, but they were the tenant at the time. So this is Murray Auto, and they had occupied this space as office. And their last lease lasted from 2017 to 2026. So they basically bought out their lease and acquired the property. Those kind of transactions we typically treat with a grain of salt, because there are other financial considerations that are influencing that. So if I could ask you to turn to page 11. The lease that they had been paying on the premise, which was arm's length, they were not related to the owner at that time, calculated to $10.62 a square foot, and included the 8 stalls of parking, and of course was blended between the main floor and the lower. They purchased the property, they moved their staff to their locations down Waverly, and they listed the property for lease. And there were no improvements to the property after the acquisition of the property in 2018. I have included the listing, Mr. Chairman, from that time on page 21. And there are further pictures of the property on those pages. And you'll see at the bottom of page 23 is what they were asking for the property in 2019. And that was $16 for the main floor and $8 for the lower level, which blends to $12 a square foot. They eventually leased the property. If I could turn you back, please, to page 12. In February 19, they leased the property to New Directions. That is a not-for-profit organization. And hence the reason why the classification of the property is 40S. And they leased the property for the majority of the main floor and the lower level. Slightly less area, I'm not sure why. But it equated to a blended rate of $12 a square foot. And that is, in fact, an arm's length lease. So whenever we do a simple analysis, we certainly give a lot of weight to actual leases, especially close to the reference date and arm's length, to make sure they are arm's length. But we do a market analysis, the same way that we don't take one sale, even if it is completely without motivations, as the best indicator of market. So on page 13, we look at comparisons as well. And I would agree with Ms. Santucci that we need caution when looking at this type of property. The high traffic locations are typically going to command higher rents. You know, we need to look at the factors that are the realities of the property. Its location, its design, the fact it has the lower level. These are all upper level comparisons, Mr. Chairman, on page 13. I would suggest that many of these that are in more of a suburban, influenced by industrial sort of location, are going to be considered superior, mainly because of the ample parking that most of these comparisons would have. So 383 Dover Court has a very large, it's almost over a 4-to-1 land to building ratio, massive parking lot. And it's paying $15.13. Pembina Highway, high traffic location, ample parking, paying just under 15. And you know, actually, I'm going to spare you every single rent because I don't think we have a dispute about the market rent. I think it's fair to say that when we look at the comparisons and we understand the factors or the characteristics of the comparisons versus the subject, we would agree that around $15 to $16 is, you know, if anything, maybe high, but it's what they're paying, and that seems appropriate based on the comparisons for the main floor. So I'll save my full analysis of the rents and just say I would agree with that conclusion. And of course, as mentioned, the lower level would command something less. We saw that even in the asking rent, they're expecting about half of what they would expect on the main floor. And that's pretty consistent with what we see. And I think it's consistent with what Ms. Santucci had mentioned. In fact, we have some comparisons on page 14 of lower level space, and they do range in our conclusions around $6 to $7 a foot. So I think it is fair to say that we have done the test of market to establish that the actual rent in place is in fact the best indicator of market. And again, that is a blended rent between main and lower of $12 a square foot. We have no contention with the vacancy allowance. 6% seems appropriate for this type of property. We also have no contention with the shortfall rate, which appears to be very close to actual expenses. We have the consistent disagreement on non-recovered expenses. And I have not, Mr. Chairman, included our large report on that. I think everyone on the panel has heard us go over this many, many times. But what I will say is that we continue to maintain that these are real expenses, the market recognizes them. And when we look at capitalization rates, we consider a higher non-recovered allowance in our conclusions from the sales that we examine. And so if we are to ignore the non-recovered expenses, our cap rate conclusions would be higher. So then what I'll do, Mr. Chairman, is just jump to the cap rate discussion. I have a cap rate study in evidence. And for brevity's sake, maybe what I'll do is just remind the board of the conclusions that the city has in evidence from the broker studies. I have those also on page 15, and I'll just cite them. That of the 3 brokers that report capitalization rates as of April 2021 for Class B suburban, it is at a low of 6%, a high of 7.75%, and the majority seem to fall within the around 7 to 7.5%. So I agree with Ms. Santucci's comments to my question that the capitalization rate of 6.15% is too low. We conclude that based on the broker studies and based on what we find in our study, 7% would be a more appropriate. But again, we come to that conclusion assuming that the non-recovered expenses applied in our calculations, as we do in our study, are 7%. If we use the 3% that the city is currently using, our capitalization rate conclusion increases to 7.25% approximately. So the request I have of the panel is either go to what appears to be a more appropriate capitalization rate of 7% with the application of 7% non-recovered expenses, or should the panel decide that they don't agree with our conclusion on non-recovered expenses, we ask that then the capitalization rate, of course, be 7.25% based on the conclusions of our study. I will mention one thing. Our study actually includes the subject property as one of the comparisons. And we had completed the study before I had the chance to interview the current owner. And so at the time of completing the study, we did not know that this sale was actually the tenant buying out their lease and acquiring the property, which is what we consider to be not a non-market sale. Could very well be at market, but it certainly raises a flag. Because again, there's a financial consideration of the vendor not being able to realize the remaining term of the lease. So on page 16, we conclude, Mr. Chairman, and I summarize in blue in our graph where the differences lie between the assessor and ourselves, or at least from our initial positions. We have used the actual rent confirmed in our conclusions to be at market. We've accepted the city's vacancy allowance and shortfall. We asked for the 7% non-recovered expenses and the 7% capitalization rate. And that brings us to a value, Mr. Chairman, of $736,000. I do have photographs of the comparisons from our market rent analysis, but again, I have that there for your reference should you wish to review. I'm not going to go through each one. And so that would conclude our presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Slaughter. Ms. Santucci, any questions of the applicant?
So I just wanted to confirm that the cap rate applied on the page 6 for this property then, so after speaking to the owner, you were just provided more information, so that's why you justified the 7% in your brief?
Yeah, that's correct. the Congress, when we believed this to be a true market transaction, we had done our calculations, again, with the 7% unrecovered expenses, we determined 6.5%. But then when we learned that it was definitely an influence sale, we would be excluding this from this point forward.
Great, thank you. I don't have any questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Richard, any questions of the applicant?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you. Carrie, any questions of the applicant?
My questions have been asked and answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Slaughter, I'm looking at page 6, the photo, sky view photo, I guess. Am I seeing 3 parking spots, or is that blue outline kind of
At the bottom of page 6, Mr. Chair?
yeah, is that skewed a little bit?
Yeah, no, actually, the ones that I refer to are along the side. They park along the side, and then I guess that number that they provided me includes, because there's 2 cars at the back. I think there's a loading door there as well. But yeah, it's along the side as well. So they had reported 8 stalls.
Oh, okay. Okay. So there's 8 stalls available. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, it's deceiving from this map, but I guess you can. I mean, your back tires are probably squeezing onto city-owned land, but I'm sure nobody cares.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That is my only question.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
I
Go
just redirect. Sorry, could I just redirect to Ms. Santucci?
of course.
Thank you. Ms. Santucci, you had indicated, I believe, when you gave your brief, that you felt that the cap rate was a little aggressive and also that the rents were aggressive.
Yes,
Correct?
I would say that it's like based on our chart, it's the low end of the cap rate. And this is a property off of Pembina and not on a main strip. And that the rent as well, especially more so the basement rent, I find skews the blended rent.
Okay.
It was coming in higher.
All right. So I'm just curious. I'm not trying to corner you. But why wasn't there a recommendation put on this property?
Unfortunately, I was away last week trying to rush to get other things, but that's why I wanted to state it in the hearing, just to say that, you know, while this is the brief I submitted, I do feel that these 2 things are on you know, they stood out to me once I reviewed it further and looked at Mr. Slaughter's brief as well. So,
Right.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I'd like to take part blame for that because I meant to reach out to Brittany to speak about these, but it's been a while since we talked, Brittany. So I didn't have your contact info, and I guess I could have found it, but I just so that's probably my fault as well. I think
I've been trying to like do a bunch of things, and I definitely I just wanted to make it known today that yes, those are my thoughts on those specific parameters.
All right. Okay. I thank you. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Carrie. Okay, I have a question leading from that question by Carrie. So, Ms. Santucci, in your professional opinion, you're suggesting a lowering of the value is warranted, but you're not recommending it. Is that fair?
I haven't run it by my supervisor or anything, but I do agree that if I, you know, had time, I do think that the basement rent came out on the high side. So I would have adjusted the blended rent downwards, and that based on the cap rate analysis, that is our modeled rate, but it was coming in on the low end. So
Yeah. Trying to choose my words carefully here.
yeah, like I think anywhere between like obviously a 7% and a 6% is fair. After Rod had spoke about the cap rate in the, like I had thought, oh well, 6.5 seemed fair, but he did interview the owner and got new information based on it. We didn't have a cap rate analysis on this sale, so that's why I didn't bring that in. But yeah, I do agree that I think the market would be somewhere more around like 12 to 13 based on that location. And then obviously the rent in place is around $11.50. So anywhere around that $12 I find fair. And then obviously our NOI is not going to be the same because of our difference in expenses, but it'll be closer.
Yeah. So you're suggesting that's the blended rate you're referring to?
Yes, like I think Mr. Slaughter used $12, and I think based on the location and comps, I think that's fair. And then just with the cap rate, I didn't have a further analysis on it. So,
Okay.
but anywhere between 6 and 7, I think, again, this is 6.15 on the lower end.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for that. Any other questions arising from anybody? Mr. Slaughter?
No questions. I do have rebuttal, Mr. Chairman, but I need not submit it because we basically have gone through the rents already.
Okay, thank you. All right. Ms. Santucci, any requirement for summary? Thank you. Mr. Slaughter?
No, I think that sums it up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. That concludes 471 Warsaw Avenue. Next item on the docket is item number 2, file number 23-242. Address is 379 Broadway. And we are dealing with a 2024 realty assessment appeal. Ms. Santucci, please bear with us while we pull up your brief before we start. Okay, Ms. Santucci, when you're ready, please.
Thank you. This is file number 23-242. Address is 379 Broadway, and the assessed value is $2,864,000. So this property is an office building located on Broadway. We have a leasable area of 18,356 square feet. 1 second here. If you go down to my page 2, we have some sales on file. We received a sales mailer. So there was a sale close to the reference date for $3,100,000. From what I could find, it was an arm's length open market, no appraisal done, no change of use. Overall condition was good at the time of purchase, and no plans for repairs or improvements. That was submitted to us on November 9th, 2020. We have 6 tenants for the subject property leases with gross leases and 3 vacant units, as per the income and expense questionnaire for 2020. So the rental rates are higher because they're gross, so they range from $20.50 to $31.50 per square foot. I also have an aerial shot of the property. So some exterior photos on my page 3, just showing the building on Broadway. On my page 4, I have the information for the office, the building with the market income. So we have a Class C. Those are our market rents as per the model. So some of the higher ones are for the main floor or restaurant. We have the blended rental rate at $14.29 per square foot. And the modeled rents range from $12 all the way up to the $18.64. We've applied a vacancy loss of 12%, expenses at 3%, shortfall at $10, and an overall capitalization rate of 7.05. I have my comparables on page 5 to 6. They've included the OFC ones that were provided. The average is $12.62. The median is $12. And they range anywhere from $7 to $19. My summary for the income is on page 7. Page 8 is the capitalization rate chart. Municipal assessment information follows. And then starting on page 10 is the income and expense mailer that was received that I had reviewed. Just to show where I had pulled my information from for the rents in place. So today my recommendation is to maintain the 2024 assessed value of the $2,864,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Santucci. Mr. Slaughter, any questions of the assessor's evidence?
Yeah, there's a few in this case, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Ms. Santucci, again, did you have a chance to inspect the property?
I've been in here for business assessment, but not for this specific appeal.
Okay, so you're aware that there are no sprinklers in this property?
That I wasn't something that I looked for in my business assessment inspection, but
Fair enough. Page 2, you mentioned a property sales questionnaire. Typically, that would be included in evidence. That's not in evidence, is that correct?
no, I had just kind of given a brief outline of it, but I probably should have included it, sorry.
So you did review a sales questionnaire that was completed on this property?
Yes,
Okay. And it stated on this questionnaire that this was an open market transaction?
that's what they had stated. Again, whatever they provide to us is what they provide, but if it wasn't that, then that's news to me, but.
So I will have some rebuttal evidence that is very contradictory to the statement, and I'm not suggesting that, you know, one of us is correct or not, but is it possible? I guess let me put this another way. Are you certain that Mr. Ivor Perry completed this questionnaire that stated this was an open market sale?
That's what they had stated on this, but just like to state that sometimes when you do phone them and discuss things with them and explain certain terms, that sometimes things will change. I didn't phone this person. I'm just taking what they had provided to us. So if there is different conflicting information, it could be just from someone not understanding how our forms were when they were sent, or just checking off the wrong thing. But
so it's possible there could have been some miscommunication.
It's always possible with stuff that's sent to us that there's some sort of miscommunication.
Yeah, and sorry for all the questions here, Ms. Santucci, but there is a huge delta between what I'm aware of and what is presented here. Is it possible that this information was culled from an interview, not an actual completed sales questionnaire?
The information that I had pulled was from the sales questionnaire. But again, people, when they fill out either income and expense questionnaires, sales questionnaires, sometimes they put things in wrong. And if it's proven wrong, then it can be wrong.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Mr. Slaughter,
Yes.
we're gonna deal with this rebuttal right away while I've got it fresh in our mind, okay?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So I will,
But if you have any other questions first, and then we'll deal with the rebuttal, okay?
it's up to you, Mr. Chairman. I think it does make sense maybe to address this because it is going to be a difference in our opinions or our evidence. And then I can move on to the questions.
Belen, do we have this rebuttal available to us?
It has been distributed. You would just need to refresh your agenda page.
Okay, so it's in our SharePoint. We're gonna all look for it here. Would it be at the beginning, Belen, or?
No, you refresh your agenda page, it will sort as the third document under item 2.
We have to refresh, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, then we will take a moment here to refresh our information. We'll confirm everybody's got it.
I have it.
I also have access to it.
I don't as of yet. I've refreshed, but I'll just.
Item 02, okay, 2 minutes ago. Yes, okay, I've got it now. Carrie, do you have it?
Applicant Warsaw orders assessor meeting intro. I do not.
Will be towards the end of your list.
I've got it as page 13.
Sorry, does it not have its own heading, Belen? Like, does it not say rebuttal?
Yes, but the naming of the document type is towards the end of the file name. So it'll be the third item 2.
Okay.
or third last from the bottom of your documents.
Okay.
Harry, I have it as being added 2 minutes ago or 3 minutes ago.
Yeah, I went out. Sorry.
Okay. Ms. Santucci, do you have it available?
Yes, I do have it. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I have it.
Okay.
Everyone's good?
Thank
Are
you.
we, are we all good then? Okay. Mr. Slaughter, when you're ready, please rebuttal evidence for 379 Broadway.
Thank you. And it's all contained on page 2, Mr. Chairman. I've tried to consolidate it there. So as background, number one, I mentioned this earlier. We never treat one sale as the gospel of market. One sale does not make a market. But obviously, it's close to the reference date, it's arm's length, it's a consideration. My valuation of this property came nowhere near the sale price, and that raised a concern. So I reached out to the property manager and I stated, what am I missing about the sale? Is it in fact an arm's length sale? He said, well, no, it was a transfer from the father to daughter. I said, oh, okay, that pretty much closes the case on this then. The IAAO standards are quite clear on such transactions. But then I received the city's evidence stating that there was a questionnaire. So I thought, well, what the heck? So I asked the property manager that I'd like to speak directly to the owner, Ivor Perry. And so we were in correspondence, and I tried to be very clear and question over and over, are we certain here about? So I'm going to just read his response here on September 19th to me and Sherry as the property manager. Transfer of ownership was to my daughter, and there was no sale, therefore no purchase price appraisal. Technically, I am still in control of the ownership of the building through shares in our organization. The process was simply a name change from Perry Property Management to Leo and Ivy Investments. I hope this answers your questions. Thanks, Ivor. And I ask if I can quote this in our rebuttal evidence. And then I'd also ask, well, there was a sales questionnaire completed. Apparently you had done this. And he says, hi, Rod, I don't recall completing a questionnaire on the sale. I was not in, and I said, were you interviewed? Was there a phone interview? I was not interviewed by an assessor regarding the sale. I don't know where they got the arm's length and open market from. It was never exposed to the market. Now, I am not accusing anybody of anything. I think miscommunications can happen and memories are short. But I think the point is very clear because I've gone over this many times with the client. Is this an open market transaction? No, it was a transfer from father to daughter. And in my evidence, Mr. Chairman, I will point out the clause in the IAAO standards that speaks very clearly on these type of transactions. So that is all I have to say on this part of the rebuttal. But as I mentioned, I do have other questions.
Okay, at this time, we're going to have questioning regarding this specific rebuttal. Ms. Santucci, any questions of Mr. Slaughter?
I just want to state, while I had read a sales questionnaire, I did look at the company searches, and based on the company searches, it is a related sale. So I'll rescind what was in my brief.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
That's.
Thank you.
That.
Great. Carrie, any questions of Mr. Slaughter's rebuttal?
I have no questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Richard?
No, I have none. Thank you.
Mr. Slaughter, my question to you is, I guess through land titles, they did make a declaration of value at approximately 3,100,000. How do you reconcile that?
I can't answer that, Mr. Chairman, and I don't think I need to because it is not a meeting of the minds. In my mind, it does not pass the test of a market transaction upon which I would base an opinion of value. Okay.
Do you have any idea where they got that valuation from?
Yeah, I think it came from Cushman and Wakefield. It's probably the asking price that they would have determined if this property was listed on the market. That's an assumption, but I think it came from Cushman and Wakefield as the property managers. I personally would put no weight on it at all.
Okay. And you're not sure if that's the case?
No, I don't know anything. I don't know how they would have determined that amount.
Okay. That's my only question. All right. I see you've got rebuttal for some of the sales, but shall we continue with your questioning on the presentation by Ms. Santucci first?
Yes, please, Mr. Chairman, because the questions I think are important to look at this, at the evidence that we're trying to determine the value by the income approach on. So if we could go back to the city's presentation, please. On page 2, Ms. Santucci, you do also mention that there are leases in place, and you say that they are gross, and they range from $20.50 to $31.50 a square foot. Did you do any calculation to determine what that might translate to in a net basis?
I did not, but typically that you could take $8 to $12 off the gross rents, and that would put us somewhere between $12 and above. So I think what I had in my brief for my market versus what the model has, I thought the values looked fair in that range. I didn't think anything stood out. Maybe the main floor ones, depending on what type of tenant would go in, could be on the higher side, but I thought anything from essentially $12 and around there was fair.
Okay, thank you. So just to confirm, the gross leases, if we deducted the actual expenses, which are at the reference date, I'll go through this in my direct, but they're around $12 to $13 a foot. So if we were to do that math from $20.50, that would result in a net rent of somewhere around $7.50 a square foot, $8 a square foot.
Depending on how much we took off, for each.
Yeah,
and then
these are recoverable expenses, though. That, I mean, it would be fair to say that that would be the amount deducted from a gross rent to determine net, correct?
For sure, we would have to deduct from the 20, yes.
Okay, and then the higher rent, we do the same math, and that would end up just south of 19. But as you mentioned, that's likely the main floor tenant, which is a restaurant, right?
Yeah, I think that was on the higher end of like the $30. Yeah, the $30.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we've established kind of the range of the actual leases, but then we turn to page 4, and we see that the rents applied are north of $18 for the main floor. Again, that would be the restaurant, I believe. And a range of $12.88 to $14.09 on the upper. So you'd agree that based on what we just mentioned as calculations for at least the lower end of the range, just based on that factor, would you agree that these market rents are higher than actual?
They would be higher than the actuals, yes. Potentially if we had to take them from gross to net, but.
Okay, thank you. Page 5 and 6, extensive list, 59 comparisons. In examination, I think it would be fair to say that these are very varied in types of properties. For example, you'd agree that 1790 Wellington is a suburban, kind of a
yes, close to the airport.
Yeah, okay. Are there any in here that you think are the better comparisons to the subject based on its age, location, characteristics?
Yeah, we have some on Broadway that come in anywhere from, I think it was like $12 to $15, depending. I can't specify if they were necessarily a restaurant comp, but I think just based off looking here, comp 10 comes in at $15. Comp 2 comes in at $12 for Broadway. 30 is in at $12. So
Sorry,
some of the Broadway comparables, we have an $8. Wait, was that $13.50? So yeah, like I would say anything near the subject property would be most comparable.
I'd agree. Comp 10, though, you'd agree that's unit 108. That implies that it's probably a main floor.
I would think it's a restaurant or some sort of, yeah.
Okay, and I'll address any further comments on the rents in rebuttal if it's okay, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, pardon me, Mr. Slade.
I say I won't have any more questions on the rents, but I do have some rebuttal to continue on the rents.
Yeah, okay.
Come back to that, yeah.
Yes, please. Okay.
So I think that is about all on the rents.
I think everything else of ours was the same except for the expenses.
I think you're right. I think there's a 7.05 cap rate, which is pretty much online with what we're using. Yeah, except for the expenses. So that is all the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I forget whose turn it is. Richard, I'll go with you first. Any questions?
No, I have none. Thank you.
Thank you. Harry, any questions?
Just one quick question. Actually, Bellen, I'm just wondering if you've lost my image on the screen.
We did a while ago.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on at my end, but I am here. Ms. Santucci, I just have one question in regards to your rents. You may have stated this, but your blended rate, did you have one?
My blended rate came in at $14.29 per square foot for the model.
Thank you. And your brief was all model driven, correct?
Yes, it was.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thanks, Carrie. Ms. Santucci, I'm looking for the I&E statement. I guess that's on page 23 and 24, am I right? And 25, I guess. Did you analyze that at all? I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I did go through it. So there's obviously some things that we don't include, like leasing commissions, tenant improvements, so stuff like that. But everything else looked fair in regards to, you know, their expenses. And then I went over the rents just to determine that they were gross and that, you know, they are going to look different than the modeled rents we've applied. But the rents in place look fair as well. Just you would have to essentially, like Mr. Slaughter said, take off what it would cost to like common area costs and tax, whatnot. But yeah, no, everything looked fine in the income and expense. It's just that we would probably come up with a different NOI based on just putting things back.
Yeah.
We don't normally remove.
Okay. All right. That is my only question. Now, Mr. Slaughter, you would like to rebut the rental rates or used by or comparisons of the assessor, is that correct?
Not necessarily a rebut, Mr. Chairman. There's just further information. I think this is very important to look at what these comparisons are, not every one of them. So I can do that after my direct, or I can do that now, whichever you prefer.
We could do it now. I think we've got the assessor's brief up, so.
Okay. So if I can ask you to please turn back to the rebuttal. And I've examined each of the comparisons that were submitted, and I'll kind of break them into really three categories. You've got one which I think are just, it's not really comparable, and that's something that's more of a suburban, like 1780 Wellington. It's a multi-story elevators, sprinklers. It's a high quality suburban office. Then there are the ones that are in the exchange. So these are more the kind of heritage, very high quality, but heritage type buildings. And I'm not saying they're better or worse, just a different bucket, I would suggest. And then there are the ones in the financial district of downtown, along Broadway, along the side streets. And I'd say that typically those are going to be better comparisons based on location. But of course, there are other factors when we look at market rent potential than just location. So I've honed in on the ones that are either something concerning, or I think they are good comparisons, but let's just talk about what these are. So the very first one is 254 Edmonton. This is a very good comparison as far as location, type of building. Again, it's a 3-story with main floor retail. Very good comparison. The rent that is quoted in the city's evidence is $10.92. Examined the rent on the vacant space at the reference date is about 11. This to me is a very good indicator. Okay. And remember, we're sitting at somewhere averaging, not including the retail. I think it's very important to separate the main floor retail from the upper office. And with the upper office, I think the model was suggesting something around 13 or higher. So that's around $11 for the first one. Very good comparison. The next one shows up numerous times in the city's evidence. It's indices 2, 10, 17, 30, 34, and 45. This is all at 305 Broadway. So this, in my mind, is a slightly superior property. Great location, comparable, but a superior property, multi-story. We don't represent the property, but I am aware of many of the rents. I can state that the highest rent that was stated in the comparison, in the list of comparisons was $15, but that is a main floor tenant, which I believe is Starbucks. When we look at the remaining rents, they range from $11 to a high of $13.50. The average of all those other rents is about $12.11. So let's pause for a moment. The first two sets of comparisons, I think they're good location comparisons. But again, they're around $11 to $12 a square foot. Okay. The next is, again, I don't think this is comparable. That's 1780 Wellington. We'll move ahead. 207 Donald on page 6 is the city's index 12. I think this is a very good comparison. And its rent for main floor office is $10 a square foot. Page 7, we have a property that shows up in the city's list 3 times. It's 414 Graham. It was completely renovated in recent years. I have the list of permits here. It was an extensive renovation. You can see from the quality. Again, I would not consider that one of the best comparisons. The next page is 960 Portage. This is a property Altus represents, and like the subject property, the majority of the rents are on a gross basis. And in our analysis, we deducted the expenses to come down to the nets, which are low. I won't go into detail, but they're low. But I wouldn't consider this a great comparison. It's outside of the downtown. So I just need the board to understand that the rents that they see in the city's list are gross rents. The next property is on page 9, is 825 Sherbrooke. This is shown up 3 times in the list of the city's comparisons. It's a fairly good comparison, except for location. It's right across from Health Sciences Center, and all of the tenancies in this building are medical related. So I don't say it's better or worse. I just say it's kind of a different category. Page 10 is another property on Broadway, 310 Broadway. Again, we don't represent this property, but I know it well. My lawyer is in this property. Main floor is all retail or restaurant. And the rent shown is for the 7th floor and another floor unknown. It may be main floor, we're not sure, but the 7th floor is at $12.50 a square foot. So I'll just pause for a moment again. When we look at the best comparisons, our range is fairly clearly from now $10 to $12.50 a square foot. And I'd suggest the ones at the upper end are superior type properties like this, higher rise properties. Page 11 is a comparison on the main floor of what otherwise is a decent comparison, but newer at 260 St. Mary. And the main floor rent is $16.50 a square foot. Okay, that's the main floor. So that would be reserved for when we analyze the subject property's main floor, but not for the upper floors. The next comparison is at Vaughan. Actually, this property is what is referred to as the Power Building. The civic address for the building proper is 424 Portage Avenue, I believe. What that means to me is that these Vaughan units must be the main floor commercial along Vaughan. So I would put that in a different category as well. And then lastly is the last Broadway comparison. This is an Altus client. This is 287 Broadway. And it was completely renovated in 2016. New lobby, common areas, elevators, windows, building envelope, HVAC, electrical, plumbing, roof, and it was LED silver. This is a different category of property completely. The asking rent is $16 a square foot. So of course it is going to command something higher. So again, now that we've exhausted what I think are either the concerning comparisons or the best comparisons, I would suggest that the model is too high. We have actuals that I'll go through in my direct evidence, and the best comparisons are between 10 and 12.50 a square foot, and then higher on the main floor. That is all my rebuttal, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Slaughter. Ms. Santucci, any questions of the rebuttal presented by the applicant?
No questions.
Okay, thank you. Carrie, any questions on the rebuttal?
I also have no questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Richard, any questions?
I have none, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, Mr. Slaughter, any other questions on the assessor's evidence presented?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Harry, do you have any questions on the assessor's evidence?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Richard, any questions?
No, I don't. Thank you.
And I have none either. Mr. Slaughter, bear with us while we pull up your brief, please. 379 Broadway. When you're ready, Mr. Slaughter.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So again, we've gone through most of the information, so I'll just ask the board to turn to page 6. There's an overhead photo of the property at the corner of Edmonton and Broadway on the north east corner. It's a mid-century vintage office building, 3-story, with retail on the main floor. I had a chance to inspect it about a month ago. Nothing really, the photographs don't really tell anything, and I didn't want to put in certain office pictures, but I could just describe it as very standard, average, Class C office space. One of the factors that I did note is that it does not have sprinklers, which isn't uncommon for a lot of the lower quality Class C properties. And there's room for about 5 to 6 stalls under an overhang at the back, off the back alley. You can see that at the bottom. What I found interesting about the property actually is that it doesn't have a basement at all. So all of the mechanical areas are actually on each of the 3 floors, which causes an erosion to the leasable area, which answered a question that I had at the beginning in the back of my mind. Why is the rentable area ratio rather low? And that's the reason. It doesn't affect my value. I just thought that was interesting. So on page 11, the biggest elephant in the room, I think, is the fact that I do not believe that the 3.1 million is any valid indicator of market value. This is coming from the IAAO standards, Mr. Chairman, on page 11. 5.3.5. Sales between relatives or corporate affiliates. Sales between close relatives, parents, children, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, grandparents, or corporate affiliates are usually non-open market transactions. If the following factors apply during follow-up verification, the sale may be considered a valid transaction. Number 1 is, was it exposed to the open market? And it was not. It was never exposed to the open market. This was a transfer from father to daughter. And one may ask, well, still somebody said 3.1 was a value, but I would suggest that as an appraiser, while I wouldn't suggest that anyone was being misleading, I wouldn't put much weight on it. For me to look at a transaction as an indicator of market value, I need to understand that it was a meeting of the minds between arm's length parties. That doesn't mean it wasn't at market, but it means that there's a flag raised. And now we go into what the true approach to value is, and that's the income approach. And what I would suggest is not appropriate, Mr. Chairman, is for either party to accept what appear to be above or below income approach factors in order to, for lack of a better term, chase a sale that the IAAO even suggests we should not be chasing. So on page 12, the first step in our analysis from an income approach is typically, let's look at the actual transactions in the property. The income and expense forms are included in our evidence starting at page 36. The rent roll is shown on page 38. I'll summarize here on page 12, Mr. Chairman, what the rent roll tells us is that most of the rents at the reference date are gross. So I've listed all those on page 12 and the face rents, and as Ms. Santucci had mentioned, they range from $20.50 up to $31.50. There are 2 rents that are net on the 3rd floor, but they were actually commencing in 2021. So as part of our analysis, we will look to see if anything changed up to the reference date. The reference date is April 21, and we need to consider factors up to that date. And so we look at what happened. up to that date. And in fact, there were 2 more tenants that came on stream. And that brought a very high vacancy in the property traditionally down to around 20%, still rather high. But we recognize those 2 rents, and those 2 rents actually came in on a net basis. And the net basis was $11 a square foot for Pollock and Company on February 2021, and then the smaller unit, 1,107 square feet, was at $12.34. So then we look back to our gross rents, Mr. Chairman, and we say, now how do we bring these down to a net contribution? If I could ask the panel please to turn back to page 36. This is the income statement for the property at the end of 2020. And it shows the base rents, and then it shows all the utilities. You can see at that time, before the last 2 tenants came in, there were very little recoveries. So we go through the expenses, they all seem appropriate, and we come to page 37, and we come to the point where it says total recoverable expenses, and we stop. Because when we're doing a calculation of a gross rent down to net contribution, we should not include non-recovered expenses. And as appraisers or valuers, we need to be careful about what we're including and what we're not. So the recoverable expenses are $246,685. And that equates, Mr. Chairman, over the leasable area of the property to $12.92 a square foot. So if we go back to page 12, we've done an analysis where we look very carefully if there are any recoveries in each of the rents, and if not, we made a deduction of what we felt was the appropriate amount. And in some cases, now I apologize, I can't remember why I used $14 for the province, but otherwise the deductions were $12, $14, $10.36, $14, $10.96. In any event, it brings them down to rents that are on par with the net rents that we mentioned for the 3rd floor, with the exception of the main floor retail. That nets out to about $18 a square foot and $17.50 for the office on the main floor. So that gets a little messy, but that's starting the rationale of how we come down to the net rents. Then we look at market rents to determine if we're on the right track. And on page 13, we look at properties in this vicinity on Broadway, Carlton, and Donald, and St. Mary. I have photographs of each of the comparisons on page 18 and 19. And just to summarize, I would suggest that many of these comparisons are superior. They're high-rise office towers. But the range, or the average of these comparisons is around $12.25 a square foot. So I'll pause there for a moment. We have actual net rents in the building right at the reference date, $11.12.50 a foot. We have gross rents, which do get messy to calculate what the net is, but the net calculations for the offices are somewhere in that range. We have comparisons that are arguably superior that are averaging $12.25, and we had the best comparisons of what we analyzed from the city's list, which were between $10 and $12.50 a square foot. I think we have a very tight range of what the office should, on a fee simple approach, command in the property. And with the exception of the actual rent that is higher than our average at $12.34, we apply that. Otherwise, I would suggest that the market evidence suggests that $11 a square foot is appropriate. So we've applied $11 a square foot across all of the 2nd and 3rd floor space, with the exception of the actual rent that was higher than 11 at $12.34. We apply that. And I think that is probably the most accurate analysis of what the rent potential for this property would be on the upper floors. For the main floor, we saw that the rent is closer to 18. It's a restaurant, that makes sense. We used 18, and we used the $17 or $17.50 actual rent on the traffic ticket office on the main floor, and we used $17 on the vacant space. So main floor, 17 to 18, upper floors, 11 to 12.34. Now that we've concluded the potential net rents for the entire property, we look to the vacancy. The city has applied 12%. The actual vacancy, as you may recall from the rent roll at the end of 2020, was 26%. I mentioned to you that we had new tenancies come in on the third floor that brought the vacancy down to approximately 20%. But another thing that we keep forgetting to recognize at April 2021, as opposed to 2018 or 2019 when some of the sales or other factors commenced, is that we're in the middle of the pandemic. And the influence of that on what a potential purchaser might value a property on, especially in the office segment or retail, I think is significant. So if I were looking at this property in April 21, I've done my due diligence on what the financial capabilities are of the property based on actual performance. But I also recognize that Fools and Horses, the main floor restaurant, had closed because of the restrictions. So the question in my mind is, what happens when we get out of the pandemic? Of course, we know what happens, but we can't talk about that. But at April 21, that is a concern. And that is one of the overriding concerns I think we need to always keep in mind for this entire assessment appeal category or time frame because of our reference date. In any event, I put all of that aside and we accept the city's vacancy allowance of 12%. I can mention that we have done an extensive review of what the actual vacancies are in the Class C market through this period, and they're high. I don't have it in evidence, but I can state that it's around 19%. So while accepting the vacancy allowance, I think we need to also recognize that we are being very optimistic. The shortfall rate I do have a concern with. I think the city had used $10 a foot, and as I mentioned, the actuals are closer to 13. We had used $12 a square foot as our shortfall. We have the consistent concern about the non-recovered expenses. Just for clarity, Mr. Chairman, and Ms. Santucci had pointed this out, when I calculated the expenses to deduct from the gross rents, I made a point to say, please stop at the line that states recoverable expenses, because below that line are the non-recoverable expenses, exactly what this allowance should refer to. And just to remind the panel on page 37 that what the non-recoverable expenses were in 2020, not including vacant units repair and maintenance, because that's really shortfall, but the leasing commissions, which I recognize the city and we have a different opinion on, but they're real, they're experienced. If I'm buying the property, I'm looking at that amount and I'm considering that that is something that I need to expend. That was $22,500, and the tenant improvements were $82,731. Now say what you will about whether we should include that in our non-recovered expenses. There's nobody in the market that would ignore that. And what does it tell me? It tells me that the rents that I'm looking at in this property, the actual rents, are influenced by considerable tenant improvements. That's a reality. I have not made deductions for either of those. I simply state that 7% is an appropriate deduction for non-recovered. It's far less than what we actually experienced in the property. And lastly, Mr. Chairman, second lastly, parking income. So everything I did in our analysis did not include the 5 or 6 stalls income. I don't think the city had that either. It might be blended in there overall. But to be clear, we are not forgetting about the parking income. And so we've included that on a net basis at the top of page 15. Took the actual income, and we minus 40% for the expenses. And then lastly, the capitalization rate. I've already mentioned that we've done our own analysis, which basically corroborates what the brokers are telling us. Our analysis includes the 7% non-recovered expenses. And that average for Class C would be around 7% or slightly higher. Actually, our conclusions are closer to 7.5, but anyway, somewhere around that amount. The city's used 7.05%. We accept that, but we ask that the board still consider the 7% non-recovered expenses. So on page 16, again, I highlight in blue where the differences lie between the city and ourselves. And we have a slightly lower market rent potential. We have a higher non-recovered expenses, higher shortfall. We accept the cap rate. And that brings us, Mr. Chairman, to a value of $2,506,000. I come back to my point that because this property had a sworn value at $3.1 million based on a transaction that is not at market, and I come to a conclusion which, for reasons I described, is actually optimistic on an income approach valuation at 2.506. This is why I give no weight to what is registered to land titles. And I suggest that the market value as applied by the city is also in excess. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slaughter. Ms. Santucci, any questions of the applicant's evidence presented?
I just had a question just to state, I think, yeah, we've summed it up that it's just the rental rate per square foot and then the expenses applied was the only two issues here today, just a difference in opinion. Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
When you say expenses too, just to be clear, it's two buckets of that. Short.
Us are 3% versus your 7%. So that's pretty much, I think, the only things that stood out. So, oh, or maybe the short.
Sorry, that's what I mean.
Sorry.
Two buckets of expenses, shortfall is low and as well.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Harry, any questions of the applicant?
I have no questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Richard, any questions of the applicant?
I have none, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I have no questions either. Ms. Santucci, any requirement for summary?
I'll just state that I do take back what I put on my brief on page 2, that it would be not an arm's length sale based on the fact that it was a father-daughter related sale.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Slaughter, requirement for summary?
No, except to say that I greatly appreciate Ms. Santucci's approach. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes 379 Broadway. And we are going to take a 7-minute recess, please, Bella. I will now call the hearing back to order. Last property on the docket today is item number 3, file number 23-272. Address is 52 Donald Street, and we're dealing with a 2024 realty assessment appeal. Ms. Santucci, when you're ready, please. 52 Donald.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, just one preliminary issue. I note that the assessor does have post-reference here information in the evidence.
Okay.
To be frank, I'm not too concerned. It actually.
My page 4, I think. There's an asking price. I wasn't gonna like there's obviously asking things for that, but is that what you meant for it?
Yeah, I think the brochure being 23. I'm not concerned about a brochure being from post references if there's economic information attached, which there is. But as I say, I'm not too concerned, but I just wanted to bring it up for the panel reference.
Ms. Santucci, can you point out where this is, please?
I think my page numbers on this one are not great either, unfortunately. But near the end of my brief, I've submitted what is just a listing, and there is an asking price, and obviously none of this is set in stone. It's still for sale. There's no tenant there, so those are not applicable today to the value, but I have photos and floor plans attached.
So this is in reference to the Capital commercial real estate listing?
Yes.
Okay. So, Mr. Slaughter, you're saying this is post-reference information?
Yeah, I don't mind the pictures, anything like that, but anytime there's economic information, we do like to bring forward that concern because it happens by accident, but when it happens, we like to bring attention to it. But I think the point here is that if it is going to be in front of the panel recognizes that, like Ms. Santucci had said, not been attained, it's still vacant, it's still on the market, nobody's interested.
Yeah.
So if we're going to look at it, then let's understand the context.
Okay. I think we all have an understanding of what you're saying. We'll consider that when we consider the evidence presented. Ms. Santucci, you're good with that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Ms. Santucci, when you are ready, please.
Okay, so this is file number 23-272. Address is 52 Donald Street. We have the assessed value at $1,758,000. We have the leasable area is 11,369 square feet. So on my page 2, we just have income and expense information. There's no recent sales on the property. Just for the subject property leases, there was a lease supplied in the mailer. They're not arm's length just because there's some comparable, similar director shareholders. Based on that, I wouldn't look at the 13.22 per square foot or the 15.95 as market necessarily. I also have an aerial shot of the property here. So you come off the bridge toward, let me get my bearings here, but you're coming off the bridge going north on Donald, if I'm correct, on the left-hand side. Exterior photo on my page 3. I have not been in this building. I don't have any interior photos to provide from an inspection. If we go to my income workup on page 4. So we have 3 modeled rents. They work out to a blended of $13.63 per square foot. We have a vacancy loss of 12%, expenses at 3%, shortfall at $10, and an overall capitalization rate modeled at 6.75%. So again, these are the comparables of a wide variety of comparables. We've went over some of these aren't maybe as applicable due to location. Some of them are outside the downtown. Some of them would be in superior locations. Again, I've included a long list of them, 59 of them. Their average is $12.62. The median is $12. So we're coming in, if we look at my blended, the blended's at $13.63. So maybe $1 or so higher. And then I have my income value summary, capitalization rates. If we go to my income and expense questionnaire, that's just on page 10. So they didn't check off owner occupied, but it is partially, I would state, gross rents. And then if we scroll down, what we had spoke about, this is just an online brochure. So again, nothing's finalized. There's just some photos, shows the location in regards to other properties in the downtown. So yes, not located right on Broadway, but within the vicinity of it. What else do we have here? From my understanding from the floor plans, there's no elevator. It's a walk-up. It's 3 stories. And the floor plate is 5,100 square feet per floor. Year built, 1961. And as you can see, yeah, with the floor plans, there's a parking lot at the one rear, but no elevator. And then some photos from Capital Real Estate just showing the interior is, I would say, like an average office interior space. Maybe slightly dated with some of those main floor photos. And other than that, just provided that from just some additional photos of the interior. My recommendation today is to maintain the 2024 assessed value of the $1,758,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Slaughter, any questions of the assessor's evidence presented?
Yeah, just a few. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Santucci, page 2, you mentioned the actual leases. And yes, you're correct. They're non-arm's length. But just to be clear, 1322 and 1595 square foot, those are the gross rents, correct? Like in the question.
Yes, because they did state gross in the INE. Yeah.
Thank you. And on page 4, so you've got 3 differing rents. 2 of them are very close. One's a little different. And I imagine the lower of those is for what's the lower level of the property, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so we have a lower level main and second, and as you said, there's no elevator at all.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's all the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slaughter. Carrie, any questions of the assessor?
I have no questions at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Richard, any questions of the assessor?
Yes, the mailer that we have in front of us
Mhm.
shows the top floor unit 300 is vacant.
Yes.
Do you know how long that's been vacant for?
From my understanding, they haven't occupied the third floor for a while. I don't have the exact date, but they were only occupying what would be the lower level on the main floor
Would that
at the
then,
reference date.
would that then result in your 12%?
I think that's why we
Rate?
applied typically a higher vacancy rate than like a 6% on a smaller building. But yes, no, we considered an office C, so it typically usually has a higher vacancy. So
Yes, okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Richard. Mr. Slaughter, let us pull up your brief, please.
Okay.
Mr. Slaughter, when you're ready, please, 52 Donald Street.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. So page 6 is a aerial photograph of the property, and it's located just near the Donald Street Bridge or the Midtown Bridge on the west side of Donald at Hargrave Place. As mentioned, it was a mid-century 1961 construction. And you can see from the photo at the bottom, it's essentially 2 stories with a recessed level at the bottom, totaling three floors. I had the chance to inspect it about a month ago. Ms. Santucci is correct that the tenant that had been in place at the reference date, Infotech, was the owner's company. And during the pandemic, they were working from home, and then he made the decision to sell the company, and he's had the building ever since. So the building is completely vacant at this time, but that would be post-referenced. But you can see in the pictures, this is what the property looks like. So the recessed lower level is shown on the bottom left, the staircase up to the upper levels. Very basic finish. Not having an elevator is a huge factor. To the question made earlier by Mr. Whitbread, that's a great question. Before I came here, I went back through the records to find out, well, how long has that been vacant for? And as far back as we have, it's to 2014. It's been vacant the whole time. So it was one of the things I talked to the owner about. He said, yeah, it's difficult to lease an upper floor without an elevator. And then there's a very limited amount of parking under a recessed area, kind of like the last property that you see at the bottom of page 7. So on page 12, we do the same analysis on the market rent as I had described on the last property. We looked at all the 59 comparisons to the city, and we broke them into different categories of comparability. And the most comparable ones that I described before ranged from $10 to $12.50 a square foot. That gives us a pretty good idea of what we think are the most comparable from the city's evidence. And then we have our own evidence at the bottom of page 12, which is basically the same evidence as the last property, with the exception that we have those net rents from the last property now included as well, which was $11 a square foot and $12.25, I believe. So our average of the comparisons, and again, these are actually for the most part superior, because they will be in properties like 363 Broadway, a high-rise Class D, or 305 Broadway, a high-rise Class C. But in any event, the average is $11.56 a square foot. And we've done the math on the actual gross rents, but I don't put any weight on those because, again, it's a non-arm's length transaction. So we just kind of push those aside. They are very low, but I get no weight to it. So to save time, based on the similar analysis, we find that if we concluded that $11 was appropriate on the last property, we have to recognize that this property is a little different in that it doesn't have elevators. So we have a slightly lower rent on the lower floor and a slightly lower rent on the upper floor at $10 a foot. But the main floor, we're using slightly higher at $12 a square foot. And then that blends over to $3 to $10.67 a square foot. We feel that is appropriate. Again, we feel that the city's market rents at, I think, $11.70 for the lower floor and somewhere in the 14s for the uppers are too high, frankly. Page 14, we've accepted the 12% vacancy allowance, but again, I think that's optimistic. I mean, realistically, this property has been 33% vacant for since 2014, perhaps longer, I'm not sure. But we feel that if we recognize appropriate market rents, then we'll accept the 12% vacancy. The actual expenses appeared a little lower on this property, not sure why. But we're not actually, we apply. Yeah, we applied the lower shortfall rate based on the actual performance rather than the market rate at $10. So we're actually applying something that would increase the value here. But we universally find that non-recovered expenses are higher than 3%. And again, we ask for 7% on the non-recovered. I think frankly, those two balance out, so I probably could have saved myself some time here. But, and lastly, we've concluded already based on our evidence in the cap rate study and the broker's reports that anything south of 7% for a Class C property, especially if it doesn't have elevators, is optimistic. And so we've used again, 7%. And once again, that's assuming the application of 7% non-recovered expenses. So on page 15, we have the lower market rent applied, lower shortfall with the higher non-recovered, the math balances out on those, and a slightly higher capitalization rate of 7%. And so our value is quite different than the cities. We're at $1,291,000. We have photographs of the rental comparisons. You can see what I mean about the comparability of some of these. And otherwise, we have income expense mailers, which we don't really put much weight on. And so that concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slaughter. Ms. Santucci, any questions of the applicant's evidence presented? You are on mute, Brittany.
Sorry. I just had a question. I just want to confirm, has the property been listed for about, since they stopped occupying it? Because I did notice that they, in a newer income and expense, they had let us know that they were vacating due to the fact of work from home. But I'm just wondering if you could let us know how long it's been listed. Has it been about a year or?
Yeah, again, I'm treading on Troy, I think is inappropriate as post reference, but
okay.
Yes, it's been vacant since they sold the company just after the pandemic. There's been no interest for lease and limited interest for sale.
Okay. And yeah, so I just trying, did they leave in the middle of the pandemic?
If I understand this correctly, they worked from home during the beginning of the pandemic, so the property's been, of course, occupied, theoretically. And then he gave up. He sold the company to a Montreal firm. Okay,
so yeah, as of the reference date, it would have been, I think, 100% vacant based on work from home.
Well, physically, yes. But
physically,
it wasn't listed for lease at that time because
they didn't know, I guess.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. That was my only question.
Thank you. Richard, any questions of the applicant?
I have none, thanks.
Thank you. Carrie, any questions of the applicant?
Yes, I do. Thank you. So, Mr. Slaughter, I believe from the description of Ms. Santucci, this building is located at Donald and Broadway?
Just south. So if you're heading down, if you're heading down Donald to cross the Midtown Bridge, you're coming from Broadway and you'll pass Chateau 100 on your right. And on your left, at the very end, will be the Cushman and Wakefield building. And directly across on the west side is this building. It's at the corner of, I think it's called Hargrave Place.
Right. Okay. And in your opinion, given the location close to Broadway, is this not unusual for a building not of this size not to have an elevator?
It is unusual.
Okay. So would you say it is definitely a liability?
100%. I mean, you limit, especially in a city like Winnipeg, you limit your potential for occupancy significantly because any government tenant will require proper access. Most nonprofits will. I mean, it's evidenced by the fact that he had been trying to get somebody on the third floor since at least 2014. As I say, I don't have the records prior to that, but it is a significant liability to this property. And I
And
don't think the model recognized that, sorry.
yes, yes. Sorry, what, do you know the square footage on that third floor?
Should do. The second and third floor are a little greater than the main floor because the main floor is recessed for parking. So the third floor, I think they state is 4,500 square feet. Oh, that's right. The third and the second should be the same in my mind, but this is interesting. You'll see in one of my pictures of this, no, sorry, actually, in the city's brief, and I won't ask you to turn to this, but just for your reference, you'll see in the floor plans that there's actually a little mezzanine. And I think that's included in the leasable area. That doesn't exist. They removed the staircase completely. They thought we're having a hard enough time trying to lease this. We don't want to limit the square footage for what is basically like this recessed ceiling mezzanine, which provided no use. So they've removed the staircase completely. You can see that in one of my pictures, actually.
Okay, I thank you. Mr. Chairman, I just want to redirect to Ms. Santucci for one moment.
Of course.
Thank you. So Ms. Santucci, Mr. Slaughter already brought this up. It was going to be one of my questions, though. So this, I'm assuming the model does not take into consideration that this building does not have an elevator, correct?
No, it does not. And typically, like he had said, that would be more of a common thing on Broadway, I would say. So yeah, it is a bit odd that it doesn't have an elevator.
Okay. And given that the third floor has been vacant since 2014, do you feel that 12% vacancy should be higher? That's modeled.
Based on what we put and apply, that seems like a pretty fair number based on our, like how we value things. I don't think we would put like the OFD, like the higher than the 12, but it does seem that it has experienced a bit more vacancy than maybe normal. So it could be adjusted slightly, but normally I would just defend the model vacancy on that. I didn't do a full vacancy analysis, unfortunately.
All right. So the brief, I believe, as you had stated earlier, is model driven,
Yes,
correct?
it's all
so
model.
The 12% is model.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I thank you. I thank you both. That's all my questions.
Thank you. I'm a bit confused here, arising from Carrie's question. So the total square footage is agreed to by both parties. But Mr. Slaughter, you referred to some kind of difference on the second floor area.
Well, the third, and I'm just stating that for whatever reason, Mr. Chairman, they state the second floor leasable area is 3,800 square feet and the third is 4,500. This is just what they've completed in their form.
Yeah.
And now I was sitting back and I'm thinking, well, I was there, and the third floor and the second floor, unless I'm missing something about a mechanical area, appeared to be the same footprint. And then I remembered, wait a minute, there was that fake mezzanine area. So I'm just hypothesizing that perhaps the 4,500 incorrectly includes that area where they removed the staircase.
Okay.
I'm not disputing the leasable area.
Yeah, you've declared 4,369 square feet on the third floor.
Yeah, and I probably culled that from somewhere else.
But the INE said 4,500, right?
That's right. I was accepting the city's area on that second floor, 4,369.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So does that take care of your concern?
Yeah, no, it wasn't really a concern. I'm not disputing the leasable area. It makes a minor difference. I think if we get the market rents correct, we're fine. But it was just an interesting point that I remembered when I was trying to explain the difference between the areas. I thought that was an odd thing about the property.
Yeah. Okay.
And aside.
So they've made a decision. They've made a decision to occupy the first and second, we call it first and second floor, and try to rent out the third. Is that what's happened here?
That was what was happening since 2014, correct? Up
Yeah.
until
Okay. All right. Okay, that's my only question. Thank you. Ms. Santucci, requirement for summary?
And no, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Slaughter?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that concludes 52 Donald Street. We have heard all the items scheduled, and this hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to both
Yeah.
parties for appearing as soon as possible. Nice to see you both again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you both.